I quit finance. Sorry. No. No. Hey, if you're new here, thank you so much for joining me. If you're not, welcome back to my channel where I talk about lifestyle and financial careers in finance. I had a pretty big video planned today about neurodivergence and diversity in finance, but I actually left the industry this week. I left the industry on kind of a whim after a conversation where I realized that things weren't going to change as fast as I wanted them to, and that my moral framework is kind of incompatible with finance. I'm happy to talk about that more if people want to hear about it, but instead I think I'm going to give some life lessons and things I wish I knew coming into finance that I didn't know. I first want to say that I think finance can be a really great career. I enjoyed making the money I made. I enjoyed a lot of the work. I just think that there's a fit issue from both sides with me working in finance where it just never was going to be a sustainable career. And I'm also really grateful I figured that out early in my career, like within 5 years of undergrad. I'm happy to speak more about that experience if people care to hear about it, but today I'm just going to talk about things I wish I knew going into the industry. My number one tip and trick for finance that a lot of people say but people don't take to heart is that you should be writing everything down. Every good analyst I knew always had a notebook. I carry my notebook on me all the time. It makes it so you don't have to go back and ask the same people the same questions over and over, and just overall makes you look like you're more prepared. In job interviews, I bring a folio. On the desk, I carry a leather-bound notebook. I think I have one right here, like one of these at all times. I always have a pen. I find a bunch of pens that I really like, and I just make sure that I always have these things on me in finance. People will say this to you in finance all the time, like you should always be writing stuff down, you should always have a notebook, but I really cannot stress this to you enough, that it is so important to always have a notebook with you and always be writing as much as you can down. I like to go back through that notebook on Friday afternoons when things are a little bit slower. I look back and I'm like, okay, like I missed that task, or like, oh, I do have to follow up on this. And it's nice to refresh my memory from things that I've learned that week, but that's my number one thing in finance that people tell you but people don't take to heart is always carry a pen and paper. A lot of my next ones fall under this umbrella of number two, which is that the J-curve in finance is very real. The J-curve is this economic theory that basically says that with certain things, things get worse before they get better, making a J. And that's very much the case in finance. I think a lot of people come onto desks thinking they know a lot, and then there's always going to be that time of sunk cost where people around you are putting their energy into you to make you better, and it doesn't always feel like you're getting better, and then eventually it picks back up. A lot of people in finance say it's between like 3 and 9 months, depending on who you ask, of a new job of like dip J-curve time before you feel like you're grasping the job. But I think it's really important to remember that most people go through that. I don't know anyone who hit the desk like knowing everything or knowing every bank systems and things like that. So there definitely is that period of time where you feel like you're a drain on resources. But everyone around you knows that. So I would say lean into that as much as possible. Everybody knows that you have to train new analysts, otherwise they don't succeed in their spaces. So in that time, take advantage of it. Take advantage of being able to ask the stupid questions. Take advantage of getting to know people's resources. Take advantage of the time that you don't have to be glued to your desk, because that J-curve time is important and it's a great learning opportunity. It's always gonna feel like you're behind on the desk when you start. It's always gonna feel like you've got a lot to learn if you've got like a shred of human interaction skills, but lean into that as much as you can. And also in this time, be careful of asking for more work. I know it feels hard to start new jobs and not be given a ton of tasks, but for new analysts, especially if you're not licensed and need to be for your seat, like enjoy this time where you have capacity to like go to the gym early. Like enjoy it and lean into it and help as much as you can without being obnoxious. The third thing I wish I knew coming into finance is that everybody makes mistakes and you're gonna make mistakes and it's gonna suck. In finance, a lot of mistakes can feel really big because you're working with people's money. I've definitely made trading errors that were costly. I know that mistakes in finance can feel big, especially if you're working with money, especially when you're making trading errors. I cried on my first $81.90 trading error. It was devastating. It was really hard. And maybe this is just the nature of the clients that I was working with who were like ultra high net worth individuals. But at some point I feel like I just had to sit back on the desk and like think about the level of stress I had and all of that and be like, it's just money. And that's not true for every desk you work on. That's definitely not true for every client. But as someone who worked with a lot of really high net worth people, there were a lot of times that I sat there and I was like, it's just gonna be okay. When you do make a mistake, which inevitably you will, own up as quickly as you can, apologize, don't make that same mistake again, like learn from your past experiences. But everybody makes mistakes in finance and it feels like a big deal. And it is a big deal in a lot of cases, but 99% of the time, it's gonna be okay. The next thing I wish I knew working in finance is that a lot of the job is super rote. This isn't to say that finance isn't interesting, but I think oftentimes like finance and consulting are lauded as these jobs that are like the pinnacle of intellectualism or something like that. And a lot of the times, especially as an analyst, these jobs aren't. A lot of these jobs are very similar tasks over and over and over. A lot of adjusting decks, a lot of, getting people the information they need. For me, it was a lot of trading, a lot of reallocating portfolios, and that stuff becomes fairly simple to do once you've done it 100 times. That's not to say the jobs aren't interesting and fun. I would say working in private wealth was one of the most fun I've had with clients and like work I've ever done in my life. But that doesn't mean that the job is always interesting, and it doesn't mean that the job in itself is hard. Again, there were a lot of things that were hard for me, right? Like the hours, the company I had to keep, the way I was spoken to, like those things were all very difficult to handle. But in no finance job that I've worked have I sat there and been like, ugh, like this work in itself is really, really difficult. And if it is, there's probably someone who knows how to do it better, who you should be asking for help. On that note, number 5, almost every finance job that people really covet is a sales job. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think sales jobs are bad jobs. I don't think anything bad about sales. I just think a lot of these jobs are sometimes represented as something when at the end of the day, what's really happening is just sales. So much of finance is about relationship building and making connections, and why you spend all that time on the golf course is because at the end of the day, what you're doing is sales. You're selling a firm. You're making sure that this firm is in the forefront of clients' minds when they need to do transactions, when they need to have a private banker, when they want to have a consultation. That it is really just a sales job. It just means you have to be very aware of who the shareholders are in competitions, who signs off on things, and all of that, and then who the company feels accountable to. The 6th thing I wish I knew before going into finance is one that I think applies to most industries, and it's that HR isn't there for you. I know that sounds shitty and like isn't great to hear, and this definitely isn't like just a finance thing, but it's something I feel like I did not have a good grasp on coming into corporate America. But I do think this is extra important to remember in finance, which has for a very long time been a very selective group that is very alike. And that's not to say that I don't think great people work in HR. I have a ton of friends in HR. I started my finance career in HR. There are a lot of different functions of HR. But at the end of the day, HR is there to protect the company as a whole and isn't really there to make sure that your experience is great. And that doesn't negate the work that a lot of people are doing in HR spaces to make finance more inclusive and more diverse and better for the people who work there. But it is important to remember that the structure of that organization isn't there for you. I'm gonna leave that there. The next one is something that I just learned way too late that I think a lot of people do know, but fewer diverse candidates know, which is that everybody knows somebody. I don't know why this was such a surprise to me, because finance is an industry that is so heavily based in connections and networking. This really hit home for me when someone was like, oh, like who's the partner that you know? And I was like, oh, like I've met a couple here and there, like this person probably likes me from this interaction. And they're like, oh no, like who are you related to? Or like who does your dad work with? And I was like, no, what? What? Nepotism is really real in finance, and there's not really a workaround for that. A lot of finance firms offer bonuses when people refer others into companies, which means that you see a lot of people who refer their friends in, which creates these groups of like people in these spaces. People do pull in diversity if they can, I guess, but I think a lot of finance is based on having like groups of people and people seeing themselves in you and all of that, which makes it harder to succeed as a minority person. Obviously, you can build some of these connections yourself. There is always networking, there is always reaching out to people, there is always coffee chats. But at the end of the day, a lot of people do come into finance with these personal connections that I found it hard to navigate at certain times. That wasn't that rude. Maybe it was. And the last thing I wish I knew coming into finance is that corporate change happens really slowly. Even if a company is talking about how great their diversity is, how exciting their culture is, and all of that, it's really a hard thing to make corporate progress. And for me, I think where that frustration really hits isn't actually in the policies of corporations themselves, it's in the education of the people who work in these corporations. I cannot tell you how many times in finance I've heard like blackness and slavery compared to the Holocaust, which I just always think is going to be a bad comparison. And no one seems like they're willing to sit down and like learn and educate themselves and do the work on their own when it's not performative. That's really frustrating, and it means that finance is never really going to feel like a great place for someone like me who cares a lot about social corporate responsibility and social welfare to work. It's just not compatible, which is why I'm leaving the industry. I think finance has a lot of underlying systemic issues that aren't really being addressed and aren't really being worked on actively in a way where I would be comfortable working in a finance seat and also doing diversity work on the side. It's just not something that's feasible for me mentally. I do think that most companies are progressing directionally in the way they want to be going. I just don't always feel like it happens fast enough or with the correct accuracy or with the correct intention and impact that I believe it should have. And that sucks. It sucks to have to be in an industry where you feel like people's morals are never aligned with yours. But I do think people are trying to fight that fight and do that work and make change in the industry. I just think that if you're going into a field like finance, you need to be aware that that happens very slowly, accountability happens very slowly, and people changing happens very slowly. That's true again in more fields than just finance, but finance is one where I think it's very, very visible, at least to me. I also think that it's important to note that that change happens at a rate that is sometimes so slow that people like me just leave the industry because there is more important and more impactful work to do elsewhere, even if you're going to end up making less money. I think I'm tired and frustrated about a lot of things in finance. I get called radical a lot for these spaces when it feels like I'm asking for like basic decency or like, yeah, like this program isn't a good idea and that's common sense, but here's some research to back it up. And that's a really frustrating experience, especially when I'm doing that work as a part-time job and didn't sign up to be an educator. But again, if you are going to go into this space, it's important to remember that like this work happens slowly. It happens because a lot of people are willing to do it. I'm just not one of those people. Anyway, I hope this was helpful in some capacity if you're going into finance, if you're starting in the fall or getting ready to do your internship or like thinking about the industry as a whole or getting ready to do corporate America as a whole. And I also hope this was helpful in illuminating some of the reasons why I don't feel like corporate America is going to be a fit for me personally. But with that, I hope you found this video helpful in some capacity. Feel free to leave any questions or comments down below. If you hated this video, feel free to leave a snarky comment and I'll try to come up with something funny in response. But other than that, please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you guys next week.